Hi, everybody. I'm sorry we didn't get a larger room. We really didn't know that we'd have such a great crowd, but thank you very much for coming. I'm Peter Allen. I'm the director of Google University, and I'm honored to introduce Charles Nesson, the professor at Harvard Law School, founder of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, which focuses on the legal study of cyberspace. He has many great legal credentials, which I'm going to skip over. I will mention that he's a graduate of both Harvard College and a summa cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School, where he's been a member of the faculty since 1966. He is also a founder of the Global Poker Strategic Thinking Society, which focuses on developing an academic curriculum that uses poker as a teaching tool. Charlie has been an active player in some of the most high-stakes episodes in recent legal history. Among his many accomplishments, he hit the jackpot litigating the case White v. Crook, which made race and gender-based jury selection in Alabama unconstitutional, and defending Daniel Ellsberg in the Pentagon Papers case. I'm as happy to welcome him here as if I drew an ace-high flush on the river. Charles Nesson, Andrew Woods, Poker Teaches.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I'm a child of the 60s who smoked too much grass back then and really never has stopped. And I got into this poker stuff on a sabbatical at one point in 1980 when I ordered an IBM PC and waited for it to be delivered. And I had learned Pascal thinking that I would do some programming. And when it came, of course, it didn't have Pascal. That turned out to be vaporware, but it did come with BASIC. And I wound up programming five-card draw Jacks Are Better poker in BASIC, and found myself fascinated with the bluffing algorithm. It's like my major in math in college was mathematics, and I had had the experience of programming on UNIVAC 1 when I was an undergraduate, and then to be able to actually write a program that played reasonable five-card draw, Jacks Are Better, was just an amazing thing to me. I got into the internet really 1994 in my law class. I teach a class called Evidence, which is like an amphitheater Harvard Law School class about how you prove the truth in court, and was blessed with a small grant that let me get a bunch of computers into the classroom. I rented 20 Quadra machines and formed my students into groups of 8 and had them work on these machines to do projects. And then we brought them into the classroom and actually networked them all together. And it was our first learning network experience. And the idea of combining an interest in poker, which to me is like a fascination as game theory, as strategic game. Poker is the quintessential strategic game. And if you're into thinking of games as languages for perhaps more complicated things, that is, simplified forms that allow you to think about more complicated subjects, poker as a strategic game is just surpassingly eloquent. I want to introduce you to Andrew. I met Andrew at a poker tournament held at Harvard Law School. It was a charity tournament done for the benefit of our public service auction, in which 100-plus students and faculty all put up $20, played a tournament through to conclusion, one winner, no financial prize, all money going to charity. And Andrew was the son of a bitch who put me out of the tournament. And we got started on this Global Poker Strategic Thinking Society, which I'm going to ask him to tell you about. The next year, when we weren't allowed to do that tournament because our general counsel told us it was illegal, and I got pissed. And the result of that is we have, in a sense, started an enterprise one of the objectives of which is to legitimate poker as a genuine educational enterprise. For me, I see it as the basis of the scalable distance education environment that I and the Berkman Center hope to lead Harvard into. Poker, to me, is just the most wonderful way to engage young minds and expands people's thought. So here I want to ask Andrew. Andrew, come forward and tell us about GPSTS. Oh, you've got a mic. Good.
The first thing I have to say is it's just as well that they canceled the poker tournament. I think it's a shame they told us it was illegal, but in the tournament where I met Professor Nesson, I had no idea he was a professor. I thought he was just some crazy old guy sitting across from me at a poker table. And there came a place where he had pushed all in and I had a better hand. And I asked him, I said, and he said, oh, I'm a professor. And I said, what do you teach? He said, I teach evidence. And I said, well, I'm going to take evidence next year. And I said, if I put you out of this tournament, if I beat you, will you give me an A in your class? And he said, sure. So I did? Oh, believe me, because I made sure to take your class. He gave me a B+. So I was a little frustrated by that. Yeah, unbelievable, right?
Oral contract.
So after that, I took the opportunity to have dinner with Professor Nesson with a couple of other students, and we started talking poker, mostly because I was upset that I hadn't gotten my A. And when we were talking about poker, we started talking about the number of students that we knew at Harvard Law School that we'd run into who had played poker quite seriously, who'd played a lot of poker, and then who had gone on and left the poker world and gone on to law school and had been incredibly successful at the law school and in that experience. And what we came to realize is that there's this incredible parallel between the type of thinking that allows you to succeed at poker and the type of thinking that allows you to succeed in the law school environment and, by proxy, the legal environment. And we started talking about what those skills were. And Professor Nesson came up with the idea of, why don't we get together some great poker players? And let's get together some great academics and some very intelligent people and put them in a room. And so on April 24th, I believe it was, of this year, we convened a meeting at Harvard Law School. And we had Howard Lederer and Annie Duke and Andy Block in attendance to represent the professional poker players. We had the executive director of the time of the Poker Players Alliance there. We had the head of Harvard's Division of Addictions. We had a very important consideration.
Yeah, you bet.
We had a signaling expert from MIT there to discuss the ways in which the human face can give away information. And we convened these people, with an artificial intelligence programmer and some others individuals, to study poker. And after a day-long session, what we came out of it was that there's this incredible need and this incredible thirst to investigate this very useful and very interesting game. From that conference was born this idea of, why don't we get together students all over the place and give them an opportunity to learn from this, to study the game, to have some fun talking about it and exploring the various ways? And I said, great, Professor, we'll start poker clubs everywhere. And he said, great. He's like, but they shouldn't be poker clubs, because poker's only a tool. It's like a carpenter with a hammer. You don't call it hammery, you call it carpentry. And so we should call it something else than a poker club. We should call it a poker thinking club. It's about thinking. And he said, but it's strategic. It's a strategic game. So I said, okay, the Poker Strategic Thinking Club. He said, no, it's a society. I said, a society? Oh, okay, whatever. And he said, but we're everywhere. This poker thing, it cuts across all boundaries of race and religion and nationalism, and everyone loves it, and gender. People love playing poker. It should be global, the Global Poker Strategic Thinking Society. I said, that's a horrible name. And he said, well, I already ordered the stationery, so we're stuck with it. So we have this great, concise name, the Global Poker Strategic Thinking Society, which I think focuses exactly on what we're doing. And the goals of our organization are this. We have 4 basic tenets. The first one is to start and encourage the development of clubs and chapters at universities around the country and around the world. We've had an extraordinary amount of interest. We launched on August 22nd in Singapore. Since then, we've either have registered as student groups or developing 18 to 20 groups around the country, another 4 or 5 in Singapore and in Iceland and the UK. We've had interest everywhere, and we're continuing to develop that. We're developing a speaker series, an educational curriculum, bringing in speakers to talk about issues surrounding poker, to talk about how poker communicates life skills. We had Howard Lederer come to Harvard and talk. We're sponsoring Annie Duke at UCLA on Friday. Sure, I guess that's tomorrow. She's talking about gender roles in psychology. We had Mike Sexton in to talk, and Jim McManus, an author, all talking about the ways in which poker communicates skills that have allowed them to succeed at a poker table, but also communicate skills that allow you to succeed in the larger world. We've also convened conferences. We had an academic conference last year, and we're going to do another one in the spring, probably here at Stanford. And the idea being that let's call some academic attention to these games. And the fourth thing we're doing is just providing students a place to have some fun playing amateur poker exhibitions, playing games where schools take on schools. Harvard played Yale last week. UCLA's playing USC tomorrow. Next year, we'll have Stanford playing Cal in their version of the big game. And the idea being that these games are fun. And it's a great opportunity for people to explore the types of strategic thought that are in poker while being able to have some fun and engage in a game that can really engage students in learning and continuing to evolve types of thinking. So that's basically what the GPSTS has done so far and kind of where we're moving going forward.
But let me focus on the thinking part. In my class, to my students, I don't start with poker. I start with the idea of what truth is in a rhetorical environment, how two-sided it is, how there's always two sides to a story, and how important it is in trying to persuade someone else that you're capable of seeing their story from their point of view and articulating that to them so that they understand that you understand their problem. It's only at that point that they start listening to you. Before that, they're just tuning you out. And I use poker as a way of focusing this thought of seeing from another's point of view. But first, I start with a riddle that I would love to give to you and see how you do with it. So here's a riddle. Once upon a time, a queen lived in a kingdom that she ruled with an iron hand. You're supposed to laugh when the queen lives in the kingdom. She had a son that she wanted to marry the most intelligent, perceptive woman in the kingdom. So she gathered all the eligible women together and gave them the law school aptitude test. And 3 of them scored perfectly. So she had to choose from amongst these 3. She brought them to the palace and sat them around a round table and gave them the following instructions. I'm about to blindfold you. Once you're blindfolded, I'm going to put a hat on your head, small little hat, so that you won't be able to see the hat on your own head. But when you open your eyes with the blindfolds off, you will see the hats on the heads of the other 2. Now here's what you must do. When the blindfold is taken off, I'm telling you in advance, I am going to place on your head, either a red hat or a white hat. When your blindfold is taken off, if you see 1 or 2 red hats, you're to raise your hand. All right, now do we understand the setup? The blindfold is going to come off. I'm not going to be able to know what color is the head on my hat. It's either red or white. If I see 1 red hat, I raise my hand, or if I see 2 red hats, I raise my hand. And the queen says, the first of you that can tell me the color of the hat on your head, take your hand down, stand up, and marry my son. Explain why. She then put red hats on each of the 3 and then took off the blindfolds. And immediately, of course, seeing 2 red hats each of them raised their hand. And they sat at the table looking at each other for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. And then one young woman took down her hand, stood up, and said, I have a red hat on my head. And she explained why. How did she know? Put your hands up when you get the riddle. I just want to just see how fast it happens here. So let me say about poker, as you're letting this noodle in your heads. The point in poker where you become a poker player is the point at which you look up from your own hand. When people start learning poker, their first preoccupation is their own cards. Have I got a straight or a flush? Was two pair beat up one pair? What is it? All these things. They're like this. The point at which you start to play poker is the point at which you're more interested in what is happening around you. You've got time. Wait. You can look at your hand just about any time. That point where you start to look and see what's happening in the environment. And as the game unfolds, you start to see how the others at the table are seeing you. That's when the poker game really starts. So how many hands up with the red hats? Who's going to explain it to us? Stand up over here and loud and clear. Come on.
It's kind of
up. We need you on.
not sort of sitting down. It's each of them have to assume that the other ones are perfect logicians. Also, if there's only one red hat, then one person will have their hand down and two people will have their hand up, and they'll be able to figure it out. I know if there's two.
Only one red hat. One person would have their hand down.
It's
two people would have their hands up because two people would see the one red
right,
hat.
right.
And that's not the case.
So that's not. So
we know there's not one red hat, but of course I knew that. I'm looking at
right.
the red hats right there.
I have it in my head. I can't give it. I know what's going on. It's kind of.
It's not. This is what my mother taught me as a young lawyer. She said, Charlie, it's not what you think of going home in the cab that counts.
Each one knows that the other ones will have figured it out too, and since the other ones haven't figured it out, they've gained information from the fact that the other people haven't figured it out.
Now you're talking.
Right.
Talking. But who can talk better? Who can? Go for it.
I actually have a different solution. I have a different solution. All you have to do is say, for this test to be fair, we all have to have the same color of hat. And since I see red hats, mine's red too.
You're absolutely right. That's not the right answer.
If she had white hat, then other two participants would have figured that they had red hat because everybody was sitting, raised their hands. So everybody is seeing some red hat. And now if I have white hat and this guy is raising hand, that means they both are raising hands. And nobody is standing up. That means they are confused as well. See what I mean?
You've confused me.
Okay, I repeat. If we three are playing, I have white hat, you two have red hats, and if all three are raising our hands, that means I am sure he is seeing your hat, he is seeing your hat, but you both are not standing up. That means you are also confused that why you are not standing up. And since you are not standing up, that means I also have red hat because you are confused.
You got it? Did he explain it?
Yeah.
He did not.
Yeah, absolutely he did.
I did.
He explained it
Missed a step.
perfectly.
He missed a step. Wait a second. One more. Good. Give me back here.
I think there's a base assumption that all three people are approximately equivalently smart. They took the test and they passed it. So you can't assume that somebody has not figured it out. If the facts are plain, then everybody would have figured it out. But that's not the case. Which means that, for example, if you two are wearing red hats and I'm wearing a white hat, and you have raised your hand but you have not figured it out yet, right? That means that you cannot possibly be wearing a white hat, right? Because you're not wearing
You've got a white hat.
No, right, because you know that you're not wearing a white hat. Because if you were wearing a white hat, I wouldn't be raising my hand.
You could be
Right?
raising your hand if you saw my hat.
No. Right?
So he pretty much nailed it, except for the last part, which is if there were indeed two white hats, he would have seen two white hats. And if I'm wearing a white hat and both of you are raising your hands, Andrew would see two white hats and he would not have raised his hand. The fact that he's raised his hand and equivalently you have raised your hand, therefore there's got to be at least two red. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I tell you, there are at least two red hats.
Well, no.
Everyone sees two red hats.
Well, I'm trying to prove that there aren't two whites. And if I can prove that, then
Already a given, and you see two red hats.
no, from the perspective of these guys. Well, from the perspective of the two of you, if you see two whites, you would not raise your hand. Is that correct? And you right, and the only reason both of you are doing it is because there is an additional red that you see.
So if let's say I'm raising my hand, right?
Wait a minute, no hints.
I just want to ask a question.
There's a guy back here. He knows. Wait, you had your shot.
Very strict around here.
So there's only two possibilities, right? I can either have a red hat or a white hat. So if I have a white hat, this means that you will see a white hat and a red hat. And he will see a white hat and a red hat also. So which means that you would figure out you have a red hat. Because you would know that I have a white hat and you have a red hat because he'll see the red hat. But you also raise your hand, so he must have a red hat.
So in the hypothetical you're describing,
Right.
Charlie and I both have red hats on, and you have a white hat on. Is that
Right,
correct?
right. Because there's only two possibilities. I have a white or a red.
So
right?
in that case, then one of us would figure it out. Is that what you're
That's
saying?
right. Because
Why?
you would know that because you'll see a red and a white, and therefore, since I raised my hand, you must have a red. No, sorry. I'm confusing myself.
Red hat, white hat.
Right. So you see a white and a red, and hold on.
You were right.
I had it just a second ago. I just confused myself.
But here you are. You said, suppose you have a white hat on your head,
Right.
and you see Andrew with his hand up,
And your hand up.
my hand up.
He would figure out.
You're thinking Andrew is just as smart as you.
Right.
And there he's looking at you with a white hat on your head, and me with my hand up. What am I seeing? I must
See,
see
red,
a red hat
that's right.
on his head.
That's right.
If you have a white one on yours.
That's right.
And therefore, you don't have a white one on yours.
That's right. That's right.
Beheaded. You lose your cap. To some extent, though, what you've just described is the step that poker players have to take in order to be successful. Is that what the point at which you realize it is what hat you're wearing is completely irrelevant. It only matters what your opponent sees. If they had seen a white hat on you and a red hat, then they would have figured it out and you would have lost already. The fact that they're confused means that everyone must be wearing a red hat, because the rules of the game work with everyone's hand in the air if all three are red or if there's two reds and a white. So all the information you have is that you know there's at least two reds out there. If there was one more white hat, then one of your opponents would have figured it out and you would have already lost. So in this case, it's a case of stop trying to figure out what you can see. You know you can see two red hats. Start trying to figure out what your opponent must be seeing in order for them to act the way they are. This is the very same thing that happens in a poker game. What you have, the strength of your hand, is only relevant in terms of the strength of your opponent's hands. Your position, whether you have a pair of aces in a poker hand and then it comes out that there's 4 cards to a flush and you don't have the 5th card to that flush, suddenly your aces aren't as strong as they were. In real-world situations, in a case where you may think you start in a strong position, or you may think that your position is strong because of the own merits that you assigned your hand, it's only worth as much as the opposing parties think it is. The flexibility of thought and being able to see your own self from the perspective of others, be able to assess your position unemotionally and from a perspective that your opponents see it, is a key element in developing business skills, legal skills, litigation type skills, negotiation, all of those components, interpersonal relations, et cetera, all of those components are based on the ability to understand how you're perceived and be able to understand what the other parties in any transaction are thinking.
So let me say why I think this should be exciting to Google. The part of this that's exciting to me is the prospect of poker as a driver for open education. That to me is a tremendous goal that's still in front of us. As a teacher, I know that the key to scalability is solving the problem. It's like any good trick, it's got two sleights. You have to put something out that's really engaging, and poker is certainly that. But you then also have to be able to aggregate response coming back to you from a mass audience in a way that allows you to respond to it and create the loop that is involved in a teacher sending out a stimulus message, stimulating a response, and then the teacher responding to it. And so working through the Berkman Center largely, we've been working to really try and figure out the distance education problem and working with tools to try and aggregate response coming back so that a teacher can actually deal with it. So to me, poker has the following amazing quality. It's got huge appeal. It's a magnificent game. It's the quintessential strategic game. It's the first game. It's the game on which von Neumann focused when he wrote his original game theory papers. It's strategic. Let's get the taxonomy straight. There are games of chance. Those are games that you cannot lose purposely. Those are games where there is nothing strategic on the other side. You're playing solitaire, or you're playing roulette, or you're playing something of that order. There can be some skill in a game of chance, in learning the best odds against whatever is offered to you. That's possible. There are some games of chance which have no skill whatsoever, like the slots. And okay, those are the kinds of games that those have caused difference over the years as to whether those are good things or bad things. Edicts against playing lotteries. Lotteries are, on one view, a way in which hope is sold to poor people at bad odds and therefore is exploiting, and you can have a position against it. From another point of view, lotteries sell an amazing product to poor people, namely hope, which nobody else is offering them. So it's a pretty damn good product from another point of view. Nonetheless, you get into games of skill, and there are two kinds of skill games that we're talking about. Poker is the quintessential strategic game in which winning the game depends upon evaluating an opponent's play and anticipating it. That's the key to it. And that's a key to so much in the life of lawyers and all the way through life. That here's this wonderful, quintessentially American game that through internet has been extended across the world in a development that has huge muscle in it. There's almost as much muscle in poker as there is in pornography as a spreader of internet. And yet here is an environment that generates money. So from my educator's point of view, I am looking for business models that will support the development of the open net. I'm looking for business models that will support open education. And I can see a potential unity of interest with Google. I think I see it, in that it is to Google's advantage if there is a vibrant, explosive, educational, searchable environment on the net. If you think of Harvard education coming up on the net, it's videos now with technology I was just reading about from MIT, searchable, words searchable through audio recognition software. so that you can search a video and get right to the words, the part of the lecture where the teacher speaks. If you imagine the wealth of university education available, open on the net, it's good for the search business, I would think, because people like to search. And so I'm looking for ways of interesting Google in what we're doing. I would love to do some kind of, I don't know whether you do them, some forms of conference where we actually talk strategy at a longer level, and we teach poker and do a poker tournament or something of that variety that would be a kind of a corporate learning enterprise, kind of focusing on the core idea. And I'm sure that if you put your minds to work, you would see any number of other ways in which a linking of Google with a Harvard-based enterprise, educational, game-based, driving internet would be a plus. There's the additional interest from my point of view of poker being the most wonderful law subject. Poker is interesting from a lawyer's point of view at every level, from the institutional level of my school. How does my school feel about having a global poker strategic thinking society and what constraints are put on it? To my town, Cambridge, which has a commissioner that wants to get a license for me to play charity poker. To my state, which calls poker a lottery and a game of chance. To my national government, which discriminates against online poker to a point where the World Trade Organization has now held us up for contempt and obloquy, and to international law. We're now out of step with the rest of the world in terms of online gaming. America, which should be the source, I mean, think in diplomatic terms. Poker, quintessentially American, excitement around the world about it, the world wanting to play, and yet it's illegal in the United States. The United States is trying to repress it. It just seems so strange to me. So poker has this extremely interesting quality to it of interest at every level, and as a teacher, it just has been a godsend to me. It's lit the last part of my career up, and I hope we can really put it across. So at this point, I would love to open up for questions and just spend the rest of the time with back and forth. Andrew.
In any event, when you talk about education, you talk about poker. Poker has the unique ability of engaging people in developing thought in a way that's really fun, which is something that at times is missing from a regular education. I mean, when I took my math classes, they weren't always as dynamic or as fun to me as some of my other classes, or my not classes, as I called my time when I wasn't in school. But the key of it is that poker teaches a flexibility of thought. It teaches skills that are very useful. Poker is really, when you think about it, the natural evolution of sport. Sport began, when we had skills we wanted to encourage youth to develop, when we had skills that we wanted to maintain in society. The Olympics were about the javelin throw, about running, about times when we wanted to be able to develop the skill in men to throw a spear a long ways and run really quickly and throw a brick a ways and things like that. Nowadays, it's not as useful to me to be able to throw a spear a ways. I mean, I very rarely go boar hunting with a spear. I mean, that's just not something that I do. On the flip side, it's incredibly useful to me to be able to make good, unemotional decisions that have realistic considerations about numeracy and probability and elements that are common to a poker game, elements that I develop when I have to be able to play poker, be able to really understand what my skill level is, be able to pick an arena to do battle in, be able to understand when other players are better than me, because I'm not that good of a poker player. But I understand that. So I'm able to play at levels where I am better than the players that I'm better at, or that I'm playing with. And so poker teaches a development of what I call situation assessment and decision control, the ability to really understand where you sit, in a negotiation, whether it's at a poker table, if you take that to the metaphysical level, and you're talking about a negotiation, or if you're talking about international diplomacy and the interactions between nations. Understanding the rules of the game and understanding the point of offer and counteroffer, or bet and raise. And more than anything else, understanding when to fold. What separates a good poker player from a bad poker player is the use of the fold. When is a situation too risky? When is the return not going to be beneficial to you? When is it a time to just say, look, it's dead money, cut my losses and run? That skill is something that I don't see being taught in traditional education in a way that's engaging to students. And poker, by using a tool, a game that's so engaging, teaches resource management, teaches all these issues, risk assessment, in a way that really engages students. And it's something that I'm sure most of you have played poker once or twice. Or maybe
How many people have played poker in this room? Way to go.
I mean,
We got a question in the back there. Go for it.
Big fan of poker, and I think one of the things that makes it interesting, right, that you can also teach and talk about are things like...
We should get you on the mic here.
One thing that makes it interesting is things like risk preference and risk aversion, but there you have to have real resources at stake. And so when you have real resources at stake, the whole question of gambling and the various kinds of ethical questions that come up around gambling come up. And so I'm wondering from a philosophical standpoint, when you think about, policy in the United States sort of being behind the rest of the world in this regard, I think there's a lot of ethical considerations in there. How do you see overcoming some of those preconceptions that people have?
There's absolutely no question whatsoever that compulsive gambling, gambling in and of itself, are issues that need to be dealt with in a way that makes sense, that need to be talked about and need to be really discussed in a common sense way. Right now what we do in this country is we say things like poker, craps, roulette, blackjack, those things are bad forms of gambling. Putting your money on the stock market is a responsible choice. Let's fix Social Security. Let's return the money to the people so that they can invest it on their own in the stock market. That's a good decision. That's something that we recommend as a nation. And yet, I don't necessarily know if most people have sufficient levels of education to be able to engage the market in a way that makes sense, or if they're taught that way. You talk about things like addiction. Well, addiction's an issue, and it should be dealt with. I would say that there are statistics that prove or that suggest that the levels of addiction in poker aren't nearly as high as they are in games of chance, in games where there's a big payout, like a lottery, or games like a roulette wheel. If you put it on your 00 and it hits, it pays 35 to 1. Poker is a fundamentally different game because there's no house, there's no big payoff, you're just playing against another player. But the addiction question remains. But there are addiction at all levels of society. I mean, Google, I've searched on Google before. Oftentimes it sends me to Amazon.com or a similar thing like that. There aren't very many restrictions about how much stuff I can run up on my credit card bill. I would say that the addiction to shopping, addictions like that are things that we need to deal with as a society, and right now we do a miserable job of approaching them in any level of education. So when you talk about poker, yes, addiction and gambling are issues, and they need to be dealt with. But taking a tool like poker and throwing it to the side because there's a danger in it doesn't make much sense. It's like asking a carpenter to build a house without using a hammer because he has the potential to hit his thumb with his hammer. Well, I mean, I think it has to do with a couple of things.
Well,
Right
let me have a shot at it.
Go.
The politics of poker are totally fascinating at this point because they're mixed up with the politics of gambling more broadly. And the politics of gambling more broadly is mixed up with a bunch of other stuff. So the big drivers, as far as poker is concerned, has clearly been the television success of the tournament poker play, which has brought home to millions of Americans the picture of poker as a fairly benign thing. You don't, as you're watching those television things, you may be bored, but you don't have the feeling that you're watching evil. You don't come away with a moral twist in your stomach like you've just been watching something bad. And so I think that a tremendous change has taken place in the public from the game having the image that came out of the early days. Poker comes out of a gambling background, no doubt about it. and a fascinating one that migrates with Texas Hold'em, migrates from Texas to Las Vegas, is connected with the casinos and organized crime, is prosecuted out of the Justice Department as part of the overall gambling spectrum of, culture that's there. But poker goes through a transition in the public mind. At least I think it's still in process, stimulated heavily by this huge success of television and the huge success of online poker. Right? People who play, 2-penny, 5-penny poker on their laptops in their bedrooms, it's hard to convince them that they're doing something evil. It just doesn't feel it. On the other hand, politically, separating poker from any other kind of gambling runs up against strong libertarian arguments. The basic libertarian argument is, I can do any damn thing I want, whether it's poker or a game of chance or pornography or any other thing you can do in your house, including a lot of physical things that the Supreme Court now says I can do in my house if I want. So the problem of articulating the subject at a higher level of sophistication than has been the case in the past is, to me, the political problem of putting it across. It's like you used to just be able to say gambling, and all right, the right wing will turn out against it. But boy, when you look at that now, the churches run bingo. When you look at the bingo stuff in the churches, it looks pretty much like a casino when they're running it. And the states are running lotteries, like 40 states running lotteries. And what state that isn't doing casino isn't thinking about doing it because why do we let the Indians make the money and all that sort of thing. So I think we're in a very dynamic time. And I think that poker potentially can be one of those things where you go from having your first thought about it being gambling, bad, evil, negative reaction, politicians don't want to be associated with it, to a much more positive image. I was very pleased when Obama came out as a poker player. It's like, okay, it's okay to be a poker player. Of course, our presidents have been poker players. And I mean, it's amazing when you actually look at the history of the game. Yes, question.
So when I was a kid, when I was younger, I used to play 5-card stud, 7-card stud, 5-card draw, 5-stud high-low with a 1-card draw at the end, and so forth. Nowadays, poker is virtually synonymous with Texas Hold'em. So I want to know, I'm actually ignorant in these matters. Why did this happen? How did it happen? And is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Happened for two reasons. The first of which is probably the more important one, is television. Texas Hold'em's in one sense, the simplest form of poker. 2 cards down, 5 cards up. You can teach it in, what do they say? It takes a minute to learn and a lifetime to master. It's something that can be taught and is very easy for people to understand. So for television reasons, it works well. From a poker player's perspective, Texas Hold'em's the ideal game because you get 4 opportunities to influence the action. In a poker game, for those of you who may not know, in a Texas Hold'em at least, there's pre-flop action, flop, turn, river. Each time there's a round of betting. So in terms of poker, much more than 5-card draw or some of the stud games, you have 4 opportunities for skill to rise to the top. Because in poker, the skill is in the betting, pricing your hand appropriately. How do you price your hand at the appropriate level to induce the opposing party to do what you want them to do? How do you price it at an appropriate level to get them to buy, or how do you price it at an appropriate level to get them to fold? And so if you have 4 opportunities to do that in Texas Hold'em, so it's a better game for that purposes.
So in your example you gave, in the puzzle you gave, you kind of assumed that I'm playing poker against people who are roughly of the same intelligence as I am and who roughly think the same way I am. And this is clearly not the case. I will be playing against some people who are dumber, some people who are smarter, some people who have completely different ways. How does your strategy work with, I'm not working with logicians, I'm not working with people that I know how they're going to view my cards?
Well, I would say there's a couple of different points on that. The first one of which is the riddle is designed to demonstrate a type of thinking or a concept that's integral to any poker success. The second thing I would say is that oftentimes how players act, something we call table image, your reputation as it were. And you can trade on that the same way you can trade on any commodity. So how the perception you develop of your opposing players, that they're smarter than you, that they're dumber than you, is something that affects how you act. This is exactly why poker is such a good game for teaching strategic thought, because just like this, in a market situation, in any situation, you're going to be dealing with opposing parties, some of whom are better than you, some of whom are worse than you, which will affect which markets you choose to enter, which will affect how you interact with these people. And the way that reputation develops is a very interesting thing. And it's something that poker players often try to cultivate, very specific reputations. They want to be what's called a tight aggressive player. Meaning I don't play very many hands, but when I play, I'm going to get you to pay me a lot or something, which is meant in part to scare people away from hands that you don't want them to bet on. But all these reputational facts are skills and strategies that develop at the table precisely because there are various types of play and various types of people. And this is one of the reasons why poker is so good at modeling some of the other interactions that we have to develop.
In law, there is the image, for example, of the country lawyer. I'm just a country lawyer. It's like, watch out when somebody tells you they're just a country lawyer, right? There must be something similar in engineering. That is, the presentation of a low-key posture on the part of someone who is in fact deeply sophisticated and is about to clean your clock in some fashion, or is engineering not competitive in that way?
Well, in some ways, Google's like that, right?
I mean,
Google's interface is so simple and straightforward that I think a lot of people don't understand the underlying complexity.
look around the room. I mean, as a corporate, Google's probably one of the most important corporations in the world in terms of corporate prestige and the influence it's had. The dress code here is slightly more lax than most Fortune 500 companies. I've only walked around here for a couple of minutes, and I've been to several law firms and things like that. Very rarely do they have an organic garden in the middle of the office. And it's a very different perception. But why? Why does Google make those decisions? Why are you trying to project that image? What are you doing in terms of, from a management level, retaining employees and keeping employment happiness high? What are you doing in terms of a competitor's thing? And as your competitors or your business partners come here, what are you trying to project to your business partner who comes here for a meeting, walks around and sees kids zooming around on scooters? I mean, I think the average age here is like 14. I don't know how young the people are who work here. But, I mean, what are you trying to project? I mean, it seems to me that it's, look, our results speak for ourselves. You can take us, we're incredibly smart people. We don't have to dress up to impress you. I mean, I'm one of the only people here wearing a suit. So, I mean, I'm trying to impress people. But, now you have to tell me.
You said one thing, a minor point, but I'm curious about it. You said your charity poker tournament was declared illegal. Now, I happen to live in Massachusetts for a number of years, so I know one other factoid. So my question is, why is playing backgammon for money legal, but playing poker isn't?
We oversimplified the TAD. It wasn't that it was exactly illegal. What happened was the Massachusetts State Attorney General released an opinion letter that said that for their considerations, they thought poker was a lottery, which gave the local municipalities the authority to decide how they wanted to deal with it. Cambridge took the most conservative stance, which required any 501c3 or any nonprofit organization to apply for and get a permit before they're able to hold a charity poker tournament. In this case, so we couldn't hold it without going and getting a permit. So it was illegal to hold the tournament without getting a permit. A permit's difficult to get. It's a big pain in the butt.
I was making assumptions.
So yeah. So.
And I was really discouraged when I went down to the commissioner and asked him about getting a permit, and he told me that Harvard was not a 501c3. Not a charity. Harvard is not a charity. Yes, pass there.
So you say that you want students to learn the strategy and the things behind poker. There's also a mathematical side. Say kids in high school, the odds of you hitting a certain hand or something like that. How would you see, government reacting to teaching high schoolers how to play poker when it's illegal? I mean, we teach kids how to drive before they're 16. but that's illegal to drive before
It's a
you're
couple of different things. First of all, poker's not really illegal. It's restricted in some places.
Right.
It's not illegal anywhere. In California, I mean, Bay 101's like 3 blocks from here.
Right.
Some of you may have been there. But the point is that like when it comes down to when you talk about teaching poker, it's always going to be a politically sensitive issue. Right now, poker is still essentially being chastised for the neighborhood it grew up in. Poker came out of Vegas, came out of the Wild West, came out of, hustlers and card sharks and all this stuff. And that's still kind of hanging over the game. So it's going to be politically sensitive. But the more you unpack the game, the more you see there's really nothing morally objectionable, no more morally objectionable about playing poker than it is to playing chess. And I think that carries over. When I say things now like poker is really much closer to chess than it is to craps, that resonates with people. People say, okay, that makes sense to me. And so I think that perception is changing. All it's going to take is school districts being comfortable with it, and parents being comfortable, and teachers being comfortable introducing this game, which can really interest students in concepts of numeracy and things like that.
So let's make it last one. Pass back here. We're right up to 2 o'clock here. Yep.
So, couple of things that this reminded me of. Are you familiar with Aaron Brown's The Poker Face of Wall Street?
I'm familiar with the book, yes.
Because one of the things he said, because you were saying that poker comes with this dodgy background, but what he says in there was that poker was the original venture capital environment because people would be able to go into there and come out with money and start a business, and it was a way of shuffling money around in the community. It literally was. That's one of his key points in the book. So just want to make sure that you get him to speak at your next conference because he's brilliant.
I actually haven't read his book yet. I picked it up in Barnes & Noble the other day, and I made a note on my PDA to go find him.
Track him down. The other person is Jane McGonigal, who I think, Charlie, you've met before. She does lots of work on game design and development, and she's the person who's responsible for getting everyone at tech conferences playing Werewolf, which is like, I don't know if you know Werewolf, but it's like poker without any odds at all. It's just pure bluff, and that she'd be a great person to talk to about this because she can guide you to other games that may be more acceptable to people that you can stage into poker.
Very, very interesting points. I mean, we'll certainly look them up.
Thank you all very much for coming. It's a pleasure to be here.